Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see so many of you here joining us. It was great to see you, some of you last night, as we shared the first session with Deacon Tracy Hume. We're delighted to welcome you to this new thing that we're trying. It's one of the good things to have come out of the last year, the way that we've now started working in this way, where we can bring folk together across such a wide geographical area. So we're covering the 5 districts of Sheffield, Yorkshire North and East, Yorkshire West, Darlington and Newcastle, and with the odd interloper from elsewhere around the connection, but they're very welcome too. My name is Carolyn Godfrey and I'm the Regional Safeguarding Officer. I cover the Darlington District and the Newcastle District. We also have with us Alison Hill, the DSO for Sheffield, lurking quietly in the background, and Katie Spencer-Madden, who is the DSO for Yorkshire North and East. Just before we get going, we've got a few points of housekeeping. If we can request that you remain on mute through the session, except while in breakout rooms, you're allowed to talk to each other then. But this helps to prevent background noise and kind of echoey interference. So it keeps the audio clearer for everybody. We will be using breakout rooms this afternoon. We also have the chat function that quite a lot of people have been using already to introduce themselves. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and they'll be monitored and hopefully picked up towards the end of the session. Yeah, the facilitators will be just keeping an eye on that. We are recording these sessions and hopefully at the end of the week, we will be collating these recordings and sending them out to folk. So if you do miss a session or you feel that other people will benefit from some of the information that's been shared this week, that will be available in the coming weeks. We have an act of worship planned for Sunday, which will be hosted on YouTube. It will be a pre-recorded act of worship. We will be sending the link out to that later in the week, the back end of the week. This is a new venture for us, and we really hope things that will run smoothly. But we thank you in advance for your patience if there are any hiccups. We're going to kick off this afternoon with a short time of devotion. And I'm starting each of these sessions by reading a few verses from 1 Peter that have been in my mind, or been in the mind of the planning team while we've been planning this conference since the beginning of the autumn. So from 1 Peter chapter 4. The end of all things is near. Therefore be serious and discipline yourselves for the sake of your prayers. Above all, maintain constant love for one another, for love covers a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without complaining. Like good stewards of the manifold grace of God, serve one another with whatever gift each of you has received. Whoever speaks must do so as one speaking the very words of God. Whoever serves must do so with the strength that God supplies, so that God may be glorified in all things through Jesus Christ. To him belong the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. Let us share a prayer together. Let us pray. God of the still small voice, you speak to us when we least expect it. We hear your voice in the moments of chaos, clutter, and uncertainty. Jesus, calmer of the storms, Your present comforts us. We are upheld by your quiet authority. Spirit Counselor, carrier of our pain and celebrations, we gather under your cloak of soft down and sharp light feathers. Walk with us and surround us as we walk with others through the twists and turns of their lives. May we be touched by your grace, so we may walk with you beside us, knowing ourselves to be restored and loved. Amen. This afternoon, we are delighted to have Deacon Eunice Attwood joining us, who is hot foot from another meeting, another online meeting from the Year of Prayer. Eunice is now serving as a Church in the Margins officer for the Methodist Church. She has much experience over the last 20 years of ordained ministry. She served as the tutor for pastoral theology at Queen's College, and she has also been the safeguarding and wellbeing officer there. Eunice is a former vice president of conference and has served on the Connectional Safeguarding Committee. She is known and loved in the Northeast, and I hear elsewhere in the connection as well, but I think she has a special place in the heart of those in the Northeast. And we are really grateful that she's able to join us here this week. We're looking forward to her sharing her deep commitment of good pastoral care and safeguarding in the church. Thank you, Eunice, for joining us today, and we really look forward to hearing what you've got to share with us. Thank you.
Bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Caroline, for that warm welcome. And yes, absolutely. Every time I'm back, even on Zoom with people from the Northeast, I can't tell you how much joy it fills my heart with. And it's been lovely to see as people have come in, people that I know. So that's a shout out to all the people that I know, including two people who happen to be two of my closest friends who were looking after their granddaughter today. So a shout out to you, Leslie and Keith, and Annabelle. Friends, as we gather today, I feel like this is a really important conversation. And I just want to say that, of course, it's only the start of a conversation about empathy. It's only the beginning. And so I've chosen today just some highlights, some things to get you thinking about. So they're offered to you. They're not the end of the conversation on anything. They're just starting points to get your thinking. So I hope that that's the spirit that you'll receive it in, starting points, things that you might like to think about. I'm going to share my screen so that you can follow this talk with me. There we go. Everyone see that okay? Caroline, is that coming out all right?
That's fine, you can see it clearly. Thanks, Eunice.
Great, that's lovely, thank you. So friends, the title that I've been given is The Gift of Empathy, walking with people of all ages who've experienced loss, which sadly is multiple at the moment in a time of pandemic, to reflect on how we can empathise with people without getting drawn in, and what might be good, healthy boundaries in pastoral practice. So that's the framing of the conversation. And this is where we're going to go. For those of you who like to know the plan, for those of you who like more of an adventure, turn away from the screen. If you like to know the plan, we're going to have a think about how we define empathy, some reflection on the nature of loss, some theological thinking, some reflection on self-awareness and healthy boundaries, our use of power, and then we'll be at the breakout rooms. So this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Highlights of these topics. Empathy. I remember being a little girl on a bus coming out of Spennymoor, and it must have been the first time I was aware of going on a long journey. And my dad said that I had to be really careful to make sure that I sat beside him, very close to him. And I said, why, Dad? He said, well, pet, we're going to Darlington. And the folks in Darlington are not like the people in Spennymoor. I said, are they not? Are they that different? He said, oh, yes, yes. The people in Darlington are very different. We'll have to be careful. You'll have to stay near to me. I remember thinking about that often, and my dad's concern about being understood and feeling where he felt safe. And he didn't feel safe in Darlington because he literally regarded Darlington as a foreign land, as a very different place. So, a definition of empathy, you'll see in the top quadrant there. The dictionary definition of empathy put here is, there are many different definitions, but I've gone for this basic understanding, the ability to understand and share another person's feelings or experiences. M literally means within or inside. Pathos is that word that means feeling or suffering. I think it's helpful to think about the fact that the opposite of empathy is apathy, indifference to others, an absence of concern. And I think it's really helpful to think about empathy and apathy being on a spectrum, with empathy, very empathetic here, the logical consequence of no empathy at all, apathy, indifferent to a person. And I think when my dad said to me, we'll have to be careful about the people in Darlington, he wasn't apathetic, was he? But he was saying something about the fact that he didn't fully understand them. My dad only went to London when he was in his 50s. He came back from London saying, hey, pet, he says, we don't want to be moving to London. It's very, very busy down there. And he says, you know, most people in London have never been to the Northeast. He said, it's just as well, because if everyone in London came to the Northeast and they saw how we lived, they'd all want to move. And I thought that was a beautiful reflection of my dad's passion for the Northeast and his misunderstanding of how people in London viewed people in the Northeast. He didn't understand, nor was he really looking to. We can be empathetic between each other, can't we? And also, I want to also highlight the fact that empathy can be for another person, or it can be for a community. And one of the real dangers in this is who actually receives our empathy, who doesn't receive it, what individuals receive our empathy, who do we want to know more about, who do we want to understand more, and who do we reject out of hand. And it's possible, and we see this in the world all the time, that people reject entire communities as different to them. They other people. We see this in how people of asylum are treated. We see this in how people who are migrants are treated. There's a social apathy towards some people. We tend to give empathy to understand people who are near to us. I was reminded that our friends are often people who share our principles and our prejudices, that we often share our lives with people who are very similar to us, and that actually if we're going to grow in empathy, so the title of this session is A Gift of Empathy, and if you were going to ask me, well, how do we enlarge this gift that we can have, then we have to be open to other people. We have to be willing to learn about other people. We have to be willing to ask the question, what does it really mean for me to understand you? So I think what we need is a compassionate empathy, because we could understand people and do absolutely nothing about it. And I don't think that's what a Christian understanding of empathy is. And I certainly don't think it's the empathy that needs to run through all our safeguard and practice. So our safeguard and practice needs compassionate empathy, empathy that is willing to understand and journey and possibly actually turn into action. The impact of COVID-19. I want to talk about the nature of loss. You'll be very aware there's on the left-hand side there, the impact of COVID-19 in the UK. It's multiple, isn't it? The cost of human life, the rise of mental ill health, the increase of domestic abuse is absolutely heartbreaking. The number of children calling Childline at the moment is heartbreaking. And as we come out of the pandemic, I think we're going to have a lot of work to do around mental health and around families needing more support because families are fracturing. And the impact on children who've lived in environments that have been perhaps violent, abusive, or hostile. The rise in unemployment. COVID-19 has highlighted and revealed the deep inequalities that already existed. The impact on local communities. My high street doesn't look anything like it looked at the beginning of the pandemic. And I've been in and out of all the shops as they opened. And I've decided I'm going to buy locally, even if that means some getting different things, because I want to prioritize and show my solidarity and empathy with local businesses. The impact on city centres. Many people who run things in Birmingham city centre where I live are worried about, will people ever come back? Charities that have lost their income, and the impact on the church. And so the nature of loss is multiple. And sometimes we only think of loss as losing people, which of course is heart-wrenching. And I sadly am amongst people who've lost COVID-19. But it's also the impact of illness, isn't it? The loss that comes, the multiple losses if you're ill for a long period of time. The loss of relationships as a consequence of the pandemic. Loss of schooling, loss of the university experience. I've got some friends who went off to university for the first time who feel like they'll never get back what they lost in not being able to experience Freshers Week. The loss of financial security, the loss of a sense of role and social status that comes with having a job or being in a relationship. Physical ability, I've already said, mental ill health. One of the things I think the pandemic really has done is highlighted the loss of control that we have. Ultimately, it is a myth, isn't it, that we are in control. We all know that really anything can happen tomorrow, but this pandemic has highlighted our lack of control over our environment, which, many people would say is we haven't lived with enough respect with nature. We haven't lived with enough respect. The consequences of climate change combined with the pandemic are quite severe. So our loss of care for the planet is a fundamental loss. Our loss of self-esteem, loss of identity. One of the most tragic things to lose is hope. When people lose hope, that has a really devastating impact on their lives. And one of the things we might like to think about is how does that impact on communities? So all of these losses have an impact on the individual, but they also have an impact on communities, don't they? And I hope you can see how empathy for an individual and empathy for a community, both of these things are needed. Those of you who know me will know that I couldn't possibly have this conversation without talking about God. So I just want to anchor, why is empathy important? Fundamentally, that first definition of empathy, the ability to understand and share another person's feelings. One of the things I want to remind us all of today is that in God, we are all fully known. And isn't that incredible? God's empathy has no limit, and it's for individuals, it's for communities, but actually it's for the whole of creation, the whole of humankind and the whole of the created world. All people are created in the image of God. Every person has an intrinsic value and dignity. Every person is equally precious to God, and we are created to be in relationship. So when we ask, why is empathy for an individual important? Why is empathy for a community important? Actually, it comes back to what we believe about God and what we believe about human beings. All of these phrases are within the theological underpinning of the safeguarding policy of the Methodist Church. I'm just saying that so you know it's legitimate. I didn't just make it up. And where does that leave us as a church? As a church, friends, I believe passionately that we need to have more empathy, greater understanding. We need to seek to understand one another, because this is what the church is meant to be. Here's a little glimpse of what the church is. It's a place where everyone may find healing and wholeness. It is communication of shalom. Shalom, peace, that is, of justice, healing, and peace for the whole of the individual as well as for the community. I'm reminded that peace is an active verb. You know, friends, if you want to be a peacemaker, you have to be in a situation of conflict. You can't bring peace just sitting with your friends who all like each other. To bring peace in a community and peace to an individual, you actually have to be in a situation of difficulty and challenge. So this empathy has to take us out of the comfort zones of our relationships, of our churches. It has to take us into places of conflict, because we can only bring peace where there's conflict. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." That lovely hymn, "Make me a channel of your peace," that goes on to say, "O Master, grant that I may never seek so much to be consoled as to console." Consolation wouldn't be a bad word associated with compassionate empathy. And this is because justice is an outworking of love. And so you'll see that big definition on the bottom, on the right-hand side. This is what the church seeks to encourage: ministry, service, and leadership in ways that promote discernment of one's boundaries and limitations. One of the things I think we get hung up on is that we're often conscious of what gifts we have, but we forget to be conscious of our limits, and we don't see our limits as gifts. You see, I'm limited in all kinds of ways. I'm pretty rubbish at finance. I'm really, really rubbish at doing the gardening. I need other people to come and help me do the garden. I need other people in all kinds of ways, but my limitations enable me to need you and for you to need me. And I think if we could see our limitations more as our gifts, that would create a greater understanding, instead of having to feel that we have to hide our limitations, instead of feeling that they're weaknesses and we have to ignore them. Actually being able to embrace them, to recognize them and say, do you know what? I don't mind that you can't do that. Of course you can't do everything. Of course you have weaknesses, because if I ever suggest you haven't, it's usually because I'm failing to remember that I have them. So I never have understood why some people want other people to be perfect, because how can you possibly ask of another human being what you are not capable of yourself? That to me is just bonkers. And I want to set it in the context of this verse. The Great Commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. This is the first commandment. Friends, this is an orientation of how we are to understand God, to love God with our whole selves. I love that we're invited to love God with our emotions and with our heads, that we love God with our minds as well as our hearts. And the first and then the second commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. It doesn't actually say love your neighbor more than yourself. Do you notice that? It doesn't say love your neighbor more than yourself. It says love your neighbor as yourself. So there's something at the heart of this commandment that says, be open to God, be open to yourself, be open to other people. There's something important here. My dad used to say all the time, "Pet, the truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." That was an important lesson, because it was saying that actually in order to understand myself, I would have to face the truth of my own life. I remember coming in one day as a teenager and saying to my dad, "I've got it all wrong. I've got it all wrong again. I've messed something up. I'm just terrible. I'm just rubbish." My dad was an absolutely beautiful man, as I'm sure you can hear me sharing with you. My dad sat me down and he listened to me ranting on, as only a teenager can rant on at their father. in Spennymoor, County Durham this is. And he just sat and listened to me. And then he just looked at me gently and he said, you know, Pet, you get things wrong. That's okay. But you're not rubbish because God never made rubbish. And in that, I breathed this absolute sigh of understanding that yes, I was imperfect, but God never made rubbish. Empathy, to be real for other people, friends, we have to give it to ourselves. A guy called Jack Cornfield once said, if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. So you see, love for yourself is fundamental to loving other people. And I really believe that. I believe we need a degree of self-love in order to love other people. And we also need a realistic appraisal of ourselves. So this quote from Rowan Williams is important to me. Truth makes love possible. Love makes truth bearable. I know that I am held in a loving gaze in God, and I'm held in that loving gaze by friends who love me dearly, who tell me every day in different ways that I'm not rubbish, that it's okay to get things wrong, that it's okay to be me. See, friends, if I don't mind that I am me, I won't mind so much that you are you, because if I can take my mask off and bear my own truth, I'm more likely to be able to see your truth. Who am I and who are you? I think fundamental to understanding empathy is this idea of knowing who you are, as I've said. And I think this is an interesting question. What would I need to know about you to understand you? What would you need to know to understand me? And if you want to, and this is, is the chat function available when we're, no, it's not, is it, when we're screen sharing? No, I'll leave that. Right, so,
sorry.
No, that's okay. What would you need to know to understand me? Well, you've already been told a few things, haven't you, from Carolyn? And Carolyn's introduction was really lovely. But she told you things, didn't she, about roles I'd done? Of course she did, because that's appropriate to introduce in a speaker, isn't it? But she didn't tell you that I was from Spennymoor. She didn't tell you, she told you I was from the Northeast. Here's a few things she didn't tell you, and I wonder if this makes you change your mind about me. So, I'm a white female. You already know that. That's important to me. It's important that I recognise my whiteness because I recognise the privilege that comes with being a white female in British society. I'm from a working class family. I was born into a Pentecostal church family, and I was taken to church 7 times a week. I was the youngest child of 3. Now at that point, anyone on this call who is the youngest child of 3 will immediately relate to being the baby of the family, because you and I both know your position in a family changes how you grew up. It impacts on you. If I also then told you that my older brother and sister had learning difficulties, you'll think, that must have been a bit rough. If I told you my father had epilepsy, if I told you that my mother was hospitalized when I was 10, and then you get a bigger picture, don't you, of my family life. But if I was to ask you the question, do you now know me? Do you understand me? I think most of you, apart from several of you on this call who are friends, and including my best friends, most of you would go, well, of course not, Eunice. We'd need to spend more time with you. So empathy, to understand another, we need time. We can never fully understand another human being. Of course we can't, can we? Because most of the time, friends, we don't actually fully understand ourselves. So there's limits to our empathy. It's always going to be a learning exercise. It's always going to be something. There's always going to be surprises. There's always going to be more things about someone that we can know. One of the things that I think really helps as a question in terms of empathy is this one at the bottom of the screen. Instead of asking what's wrong with people when they do something to upset you, think about asking what has happened to you. more and more I recognise that none of us can understand what's going on in people's lives. None of us can understand someone's circumstances. And actually, we need to give each other a bit more space to journey in that. So here are some of the things that I did mention to you, but not all of them. So in terms of my identity being formed, it's formed in multiple ways, isn't it? And this is just some of the list. And I wonder if you would add more to them. And you might want to make a note of the things that you would add, the things that are important to you. So I've put ethnicity, gender, culture, economics. I mentioned economics to you, didn't I? You know, it's important to me that I was born into a working class family because I'm proper proud of being working class. But I'd have to tell you, friends, now I shop at Waitrose. So that working class label, I can't really own it, can I? My mum would never have called anyone working class who shopped at Waitrose or Marks and Spencer's. In fact, my mum, if she wanted to impress people, would buy the cakes from Marks and Spencer's. The family circumstances that you were socialized into, your access to education, all of these things impact on your identity and your understanding of who you are, but they also impact on how you understand and how you judge other people. These are just some of the things you might want to add, further things that come to your mind. It's not exhaustive. So, an African theologian describes human identity as this, and it's really obvious when you think about it, isn't it, of course, that every human person is in certain respects, like all others, like some others, like no other. Hence, we can never fully understand another person. We have similarities, don't we? We belong to the human race. We rely on oxygen for breathing. We are all loved by God. But in many other ways, we're very different. And I'm particularly keen that we really understand the differences that it is to be in the UK and to be Black, brown, or Asian. Alongside the pandemic, I believe we have seen a pandemic of racism in our society. And I think all people of faith, all people of goodwill need to challenge the sin of racism. Healthy boundaries. I want to give you these two images to illustrate what I think are healthy boundaries. You'll see on one side of the picture, I'm sure many of you recognize the Berlin Wall. It's a solid structure built to keep people out. It has people on one side, people on the other side. This is very different to a fence. The fence, you can see through it, can't you? It keeps things safe, but it doesn't build the impenetrable wall that is the Berlin Wall. And I think healthy relationships and a way of expressing healthy empathy is to have a fence as a boundary rather than a wall. Because I think healthy boundaries in pastoral, in all relationships, need to be porous to love, grace, generosity, empathy, understanding, the good things of God that keep human relationships good. We need to build fences, not walls. And so healthy boundaries, I believe, allow the space between us. Another illustration of healthy boundaries would be the fences that, that keep the sheep in the field, the arteries that keep the blood flowing through your arterial system. You don't want it leaking out, friends. You want the oxygen to leak out. You don't want your blood leaking out. Boundaries are to keep things safe. And I think this is how we need to see relationships. Healthy boundaries enable relationships to be safe. They acknowledge that I know where I end and you begin. So I understand myself and I understand you to be different. Yeah, we're not blending into each other. And I think that's really healthy. Let me explain a bit more. So healthy boundaries in relationships. And I've put these into three categories. You could describe these in many ways. But physical space, physical boundaries. And I think this is so important in safeguarding work. We need to think about how we use our bodies and the spaces between them. Our use of touch in church is ideal. We often don't remember to ask people if it's okay to touch them. We don't remember that other people's boundaries of touch may be different to ours. I believe, friends, that everyone has the right not to be touched. That includes you, it includes me. Whether you're the minister of the church, the local preacher, the treasurer, the safeguarding officer, you have a right not to be touched. And in terms of how gesture is used, some gesture is inappropriate in some cultures. We have to learn what it means to understand how we use our bodies. Everyone uses their bodies differently, and we need to make sure that the boundary of physical space is kept on either side of that fence. Not because, remember, we want our physical space to be permeable to generosity, to compassion, to this empathy that we're describing. But we don't want it to alienate people. We don't want it to hurt people. Emotional space, how we use our words. Even the tone and the volume and the expression is important, isn't it? Healthy emotional intimacy and distance is really important. Different cultures express emotions differently, don't they? When I was brought up in the Pentecostal tradition, we were very exuberant. We were known in the town for being loud. We used to open the windows on our meetings, and it was loud and it was joyful, and there was a lot of dancing, and I used to play the tambourine, and it was just wonderful. The first time I took my father to a Methodist church, friends, I'm afraid he was a bit worried about us all. He was worried at the lack of emotional expression. He said, "Where is the joy? Where is the volume?" He says, "Where's the amens?" And my dad concluded that, Methodist church wasn't so good, but he was completely misunderstanding and demonstrating quite a significant lack of emotional empathy for an experience he hadn't had. My dad led that the Pentecostal tradition and the Methodist tradition, how we express ourselves, very different. The use of spiritual space, how we use prayer. We need to be careful how we use prayer, friends. We mustn't weaponize prayer by using it to say things to people that we're having a go at them for, or we're trying to direct their lives. Even saying to people, "Would you like me to pray?" We need to be careful with that. I'm keen at offering people prayer, but I always want to make it easy for them to decline. So if I was saying to Carolyn, would you like me to pray for you? I would say, "Carolyn, would you like me to pray for you? Or would you like me to pray for you later in church?" I'd make it easy for Carolyn to tell me, no, she doesn't want that. Because the person with power has to make it easy for the one who is vulnerable. A person experiencing loss, a person in an emotional state is vulnerable, and they need the person with more power in that scenario to be the one who advocates. So, what might unhealthy boundaries in relationships look like? And I've just given you a few examples here. Telling all, have you come across people who just overshare, friends, who tell you things and you think, "Oh goodness, does the other person know that you're telling me all that about them?" Talking very intimately on a first encounter. Perhaps overwhelming someone, talking so much you just don't let them get a word in. Against your personal values because someone says, "I'd like you to do this," and even though you know you don't really want to, you feel like you must. Letting others direct or define your life, expecting other people to meet your needs. All of these things on this list, you never say no. You believe you don't have a right for your needs to be met. Can you see how alert they are in terms of our safeguarding work? All of these things make people vulnerable because they enable potentially someone else. If we collapse our boundaries too quickly, they can be trampled on. And with someone who is vulnerable and in doing things like this, we need to be clear where our boundary is. We need to keep the fence there. We need not to collapse that fence in order for the other person to become vulnerable. These are some of the ways in which we have power. I think one of the things that often is at the heart of unhealthy boundaries and boundaries being crossed and our lack of understanding is because we misuse the power that we have. Power ultimately is ambiguous, isn't it? There's nothing wrong with power. Power is what got you all into the room this morning. Power's working the technology behind us. Power is ambiguous. It's how we use our power that is really important. And it's really important when we think about healthy boundaries to recognize the positional power we might have in an organization, the relational power because of people we know, the resources at our disposal, the physical power if disabled, the power of our personality that can be very, very strong. Knowledge, we might know all kinds of things. And if a person who is vulnerable has come to ask us our opinion, we have to be really careful with that we don't be overly directed. Experiential power. Have any of you ever been in a church council where you've put forward what you think was a great idea and someone says to you, oh, I'm sorry, I'm using Carolyn here. I'm sorry, Carolyn, we tried that 10 years ago. We tried that, Carolyn. It didn't work then, it won't work now. And Carolyn's all deflated because she thought she had a great idea. She did have a great idea. And the fact that it didn't work 10 years ago really doesn't mean it won't work now. But that voice can squash Carolyn. And they are demonstrating a real lack of empathy because the empathetic thing to do would be to say, Carolyn, please share your idea. That sounds interesting. Spiritual power. There are some people in church who were given authority because people think they're a great prayer or they're a great Christian. And sometimes those people can be on the unhealthy side of their boundaries. So this is just a simple way, this slide, to remind us that power over people is the power that often leads to abuse. It's on the wrong side of the boundary. That power for people can be healthy, but it may not be. What we really want is power with people. And the motto of the Poverty Truth Commission, nothing about us without us is for us. This orientation of power is power alongside you, power that is with you, not acting over and against you, not telling you what to do. This would be me saying, Caroline, what do you think? You share with me. That's very much alongside one another. To move on now to just some thinking around loss and bereavement. And I want to share with you particularly some new, over the last 20 years, some really interesting work has been done. And I've put the book title up there. I've talked a lot to you about my father today. My father died 20 years ago, but there isn't a day that I don't think about him, because I have no interest in letting go of my father. And I don't even use the language of moving on. My language is that I have a continuing bond to my father that I rejoice in. And I recognize that in my bereavement, that love didn't end the relationship with my father. If you were to ask me, I still love him and I still think of him. And actually, he was great, and he was quite a big personality. He talked more than I did. Can you imagine that? Talked more than I do. And in that, when I think, what would my dad think? What would my dad say? Friends, I know what he would say, and I know what he would think, and I find that deeply comforting. So I feel like actually his loss in my life, the relationship has been redefined. Of course, it's hugely impactful. This doesn't negate the losing that happens in bereavement. But I think these continuing bonds work in different ways. So many, many years ago, over 20 years ago now, when I became an ordained deacon, I gave up being a nurse. But actually, being an intensive care nurse is still part of my identity. It's still part of what I enjoy and what I talk about. There's still a bond to it. So I think those slides early on, when we thought about loss, we need to think about what are the continuing healthy bonds and what are the unhealthy bonds with losses that we've had. I do want to just use this opportunity to say some things that I think you all know this, but I just want to say them again. These common myths that all people grieve in the same way, that it takes 2 years, 3 years, 4 years amount of time to adjust. No one can tell you how long it will take to adjust, to integrate, how long grief should take. That's nonsense. And that the intensity of grief shows how much you love the person. That's nonsense too. Things you should never say. And I think this list of things you should never say, they're not only true about bereavement, they're true in many scenarios. I know how you feel. I can never say that. I would never dream to say of Carolyn, I know how you feel. I can't know how Carolyn feels. I'm not Carolyn. I can say to Carolyn, I've had a similar experience. I know how I felt then, but I can never know how Carolyn feels. It was probably for the best is a terrible thing to say to anyone who's lost someone. You should be over this by now, terrible thing. And this doesn't just include loss of being bereaved. It could be loss of a job. It could be loss of physical health. It was God's will, timing, or purpose is a terrible thing to say in every way, theologically, pastorally, and demonstrates an absolute lack of compassion. God only gives you what you can cope with. That's terrible nonsense, friends, isn't it? We all, I think you would, how can we possibly say that? God needed them or wanted them. Terrible. Things you might say. It's really good to see you. I'm really sorry for your loss. I can't imagine the pain you were going through, but I'm here with you and talking about the loss, not pretending it hasn't happened. These are things that I think are really important. I just want to highlight something because the Caroline's notes said people of all ages. I just want to say something about children's grief. People who are specialists in child bereavement say that the 3 key questions of a child when they have been bereaved of a person is, did I cause the loss to happen? Is it going to happen to me? Who will take care of me? And that a lot of reassurance and honesty is needed for children. And some things that have been found really unhelpful to say that cause a child to feel overly responsible, saying that, if they've sadly lost their father, that they have to look after their mother, saying don't be brave, don't cry, because adults can't, that's usually about adults being unable to cope with a child's feelings. Given attention to all the children, not just the ones who look upset, and really encourage the family to grieve together. I put that slide in and I hope that's not triggering for anyone. I do want to say that I'm really conscious as we talk about some of these subjects that could be quite painful for people. So do take care of yourselves in this. And this is what we do need to do. Create safe spaces. And this is at the heart of safeguarding. Do you recognise, friends, how much of the good practice around safeguarding is embedded in compassionate empathy? Creating a safe space, being approachable, willing to learn. Listen, listen, listen. Not making assumptions, not being judgmental, not rushing to quick conclusions. Maintaining those healthy boundaries, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and resisting playing the role of rescuer, fixer, or the hero. I can't fix Caroline. She doesn't need me to fix her. If there's something wrong, she needs me to journey alongside her in her own way. She doesn't need me to fix her. And I want to conclude with this poem, this writing on empathy that's in this beautiful book by Richard Carter. Actually, I can't see the whole of it, so I'm just going to get it and read it off my copy. When you meet people face to face and see their humanity, it becomes hard not to carry them with you, holding within you their cry and longing for their joy. To be with people means that you know that there is no fix or easy solution, only this open wound. It is to know, too, that everyone has their own backstory, which is never entirely as they seem, and can be told in many different ways. To be with someone means to be with them as they are, not as you or I would like them to be. It is to acknowledge the deeper and undisclosed narrative that you, and possibly even they, will never fully know or fully understand. It is to accept the mystery of our life and our ways of telling ourselves who we are and why we are here, and that has many layers. Prayer is not the diagnosis or the medication. It is the love of God for the person as they are. God above, God beside, God beneath, God with us in storm and in calm, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. It is this love that loves the person, undefined by sickness or by ill health. It is this love that heals the soul, not just now, but for all eternity. And friends, these are the questions that we'd like to invite you to look at in your breakout rooms. Friends, in offering you these questions, we don't expect you to go through every one of them by any means. They're starting points. If indeed you would like to take the conversation in your group down a different route, please do. These are offered as starter points. You might like to choose one or two. Feel free to do that. Thank you so much for listening. Okay, friends, anyone have any comments, observations?
I haven't raised my hand, but I've just unmuted, so can I go? Just Rach Ward, where am I?
Hi, Rach. Yes, you can. Go for it.
Yeah. Hi, Eunice. One of the things that came out in our group, we were talking about the sense of loss and multiple losses, particularly, and we got talking about losses through the church for things like toddler groups, but we also recognised the loss that there is for in-person worship at the moment. And that hadn't really struck me before, but that's going to be a significant loss in our churches, because we're used to singing and this kind of thing, and I'd been a little bit dismissive of it, thinking, well, there are other ways that we can worship, but actually it was good today to recognise that is a loss. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for reminding us of the sheer multiplicity of loss that we all experience, and we can't grade it, can we? We can't decide, oh, that's not really important, that's less important, because the loss for an individual can be quite profound. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Lydia.
So I shared with my group about my own experience of loss and how that's helped me to empathise with other people. But I just really want to say, I know there's an NHS waiting list longer than any of us could imagine for talking therapies and counselling, but I would fully recommend that to anyone who is able to access it. It's a really useful tool to be able to help yourself and then help others as well. And I've just done my first session of the mental health first aid course this morning, and I fully recommend that to other people as well. So it gives you all sorts of tools and affirms your own story in that, actually. So that's a really helpful thing to do as well. And also, I find Mother's Day hard because of my own experience of loss. But I came across this year a resource called Mother's Day Runaways. And if there are local people who are interested in running such a service, if they look into it, they have tons and tons of resources on their website, including services you can lead on a local level as well.
Thank you so much, Lydia, and thank you for sharing about. I've done the mental health first aid course. I'd highly recommend. I did it with a load of builders in Birmingham, and that was just fascinating. They were just brilliant, because the construction industry actually has a lot of people experiencing suicide, and on a construction site, you know, there's the means to do it. So thank you for sharing that. That's really great. Carla, hiya.
Hey Eunice, just a brief one to follow on from mental health first aid. There's going to be a number of instructors trained across within the church, and so there'll be training rolled out at the start of the new connectional year. So just to watch out for that. I know there's been a lot of interest expressed.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. And it's interesting, isn't it, the amount of churches who did offer listening spaces, and you know, listening spaces outdoors, particularly for people who are vulnerable, street homeless. You know, that's something that we could do, isn't it? Dion. Hi.
Hi Eunice, this isn't something that we discussed in the group, but it's something from training before, and it's specifically talking about young people in grief. So I thought just to share with the group. And what it was is for a young person who's maybe 4 or 5 years old, as they come across the developmental milestones, they then go through another sense of loss because they experience it as a 5-year-old. But then as they grow up, they're then experiencing it as an 8-year-old, and it's different. And then when they're going into their teenage years and having this awareness that, you know, I mean, it's different from what we experience as adults, because it's just about their, you know, their relation and understanding to the world. But it was something that really resonated with me. I haven't thought of that before. People take a long time, but you can have a child of 5 who then hits 16 and then is starting to experience other loss, never getting walked down the aisle, etc. But just to share that as another thought to consider.
Thank you. I think that's really, really helpful. Anyone else?
I wanted to say, you haven't mentioned one of the great bereavements when one of a partner, wife or husband, develops Alzheimer's.
Yes, do you want to share anything on that, John?
Yes, my experience was that there's a gradual change of personality which makes relationships difficult. And in the case of my late wife, who died just nearly 2 years ago, it was almost a relief when she developed an immediate surgical problem that brought the end to her life in a matter of a week. And yet, one feels guilty, of course.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, I appreciate. I by no means mentioned the full range of bereavements that are possible. Thank you for drawing that to our attention. I'm very aware that you might be aware of it too, John. John Swinton's work on dementia and loss, Living in the Memories of God, is one of the most beautiful pastoral texts I've come across. He talks about what it is to be remembered when you can no longer remember who you are, and the impact of that on your family. So I would commend folks to think about that. Thank you for sharing that, John. Thank you so much.
What was that called again, Eunice, please?
John Swinton. It's called Living in the Memories of God. Beautiful text. Anyone else, friends, want to make a comment? Or I don't know if are there any questions in the chat that colleagues want to tell me about?
I'm just reading through the chat. There's lots of helpful links and things that have been put in there, and maybe one thing that we can do at the end of this, we'll copy and paste that chat and make sure that people can have a copy of it, because it's difficult to be able to take in all the comments that people have been writing in there. So we thank you for that, and we'll make sure that that's available afterwards.
Yes, that's a lovely idea. Friends, do feel free to share resources. I think that's lovely. And if you're going to recommend a book, I always think it's helpful, Katie, I don't know about you, if people just put a couple of sentences as to why they're recommending it, so people know what kind of, you know, what you thought of it, and who you think it would be helpful too. I've got endless lists of book recommendations, but you don't want all of mine. Anything else, friends, or have we exhausted ourselves this afternoon? I'm conscious of time. You've all been great being on Zoom for so long. It's much appreciated.
Great. If there's no further comments, I'll just finish our session today. Just before I issue some words of thanks and just lead us in a brief time of prayer, just want to say, if you've been affected by anything emotional that we talked about today, then what we would really encourage you to do is find someone that you trust that you can talk to, whether that be your minister or your pastoral visitor or just generally a friend that you trust. If you've been affected emotionally by anything that we talked about together, then please do speak to somebody. If you're really struggling and you feel that you don't have any contacts at all, then please contact your district safeguarding officer and we'll be able to put you in contact with somebody who could perhaps provide you some pastoral care during this time. So before we leave, I just wanted to say a few thank yous, really. A massive thank you to our tech gurus who are lurking in amongst the participants somewhere. We've had Liddy, Kira and Catherine bobbing in and out today. It's significant pressure operating the technology for a Zoom that is this big. And one that I wouldn't want the responsibility for, but we really are appreciative and grateful that they are here and everything has just run really smoothly this afternoon, so thank you to them. And we also want to thank our regional district safeguarding officers, our district administrators and some of our digital communication enablers as well, who have really spent a great deal of time preparing this safeguarding conference and putting together the different sessions throughout the week. So today's session was the second session in a series of sessions that we are running all week. And Eunice, we are so extremely grateful and blessed to have had you with us this afternoon. We know how incredibly busy you are and for want of any better words, how in demand you are as well. And I think that is just testimony to how God is using you in your ministry and how people appreciate your experience and your wisdom. So we thank you greatly that you have been with us this afternoon. We thank you so much for guiding us through thoughts around this valuable gift of empathy that each one of us can offer to others. And as has been picked up on conversations today, we are in a time where everybody's experienced loss of some description, whether that be financial loss, loss of a loved one, loss of finances, loss of education, loss of time being able to spend together with those people that we love. We've all experienced loss in some way. We've experienced loss as individuals, and we've experienced loss as church communities as well. And sadly, some church communities have had to close their buildings, and the grief and the loss that must cause for people must be extremely difficult. And sometimes, I know I'm speaking personally here, but I'm sure many people will identify with this. Sometimes you can feel absolutely powerless as to know what to do and how to respond. And something that's come across really strongly for me throughout this session is that for those that have experienced loss, that genuine and compassionate empathy from another individual can be extremely empowering. And it's an important part of that journey as we begin a healing process. And part of that is really looking inwards and looking at ourselves and understanding ourselves and who we are, that can play an important part of how we understand others. So let's just, as we close our session, just spend a few moments in prayer and lifting all of this to God. So let's just begin with a moment's quiet where we can lift to God some of the people that we personally know who have experienced loss and grief at this time. Our Lord God, having experienced pain and suffering as a human, we are aware that you can understand and empathise with us when we feel pain. Lord, as our social connections become easier over the coming months, enable us to listen and to hear people's stories, those individual stories and those from communities. Allow us not only to show empathy, but feel empathy towards others in their situations and their circumstances, and enable us to respond with love, kindness, and compassion. Among showing empathy for others, may we learn to bear our own truth and love ourselves. Enable us, Lord, to see a glimpse of ourselves through your eyes. And a blessing as we go forth into the rest of this day. May the God of peace, who raised Christ from the dead, strengthen your inner being for every good work. And may the blessing of God Almighty, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit rest upon you and dwell within you this day and forevermore. Amen. Thank you for taking this time out of your day to spend with us and join with us in thinking about this really important issue. And thank you for all that you have contributed. And we hope that you have a good rest of the day. And if you are booked on another session later on this week, we look forward to seeing you again.